Hello, and welcome to the live launch party for All the Prospect Around Us, which is a book by C.S. Humble that is coming out December 13th. And we are here to celebrate that release. I am Sadie Hartmann. If you don't know who I am the co-owner of Nightworms. I am also the editor-in-chief of Dark Hart, which is the publisher of this book that we are talking about today. And with me is Seth Humble, the author. Hi, Seth.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
And we have special guests, Ross Jeffery, who is also a very notable author in the horror community. I've read plenty of his work. He is an amazing talent. Ross, hello.
Hello.
We're off to a screaming start here.
Also with us is Catherine McCarthy. Hello, Catherine.
Hello, everyone.
Catherine is also a mega talent in her own right. I've read pretty much everything that she has put out as well. Definitely has earned a place in my reader's heart. And I'm so thankful that both Ross and Catherine have joined us to celebrate Seth's book today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Just a little bit of housekeeping for those of you who are watching us live. Please feel free to make yourself at home in the comments, hang out and chat. I'll be monitoring that, looking for anybody who has any questions for Seth about the book or about the series. Even if you want to ask some questions for Ross or Catherine, that's totally fine. But yeah, just feel free to be yourselves in there. If you get unruly, I will have to be mother horror for you. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and just start with Ross or Catherine if you have a question, or Beth, if you want to do your reading. I'm open to however you guys want to kick things off.
I have a question. Obviously this is the second book. Both books absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
Huge fan. And I hadn't read anything of you before this, so this is exceptional. I was going to ask, because the first book, remind me, I was about to say it.
All These Subtle Deceits.
That's the one. Dealt more with kind of I would say like possession. And this one is this one broke my heart, like just slayed me so much.
Sorry, I'm not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry. And I was for me, this one focused more on kind of like characters and about faith, generally speaking. And I know there's the books that you've got the series lined up. Will kind of each book, I don't know, I don't want any spoilers, but will they kind of look at different aspects of religion and faith as they go along, like spiritual realm and all this kind of stuff? Because I know there are little elements of that in all the Prospects one. So I was just kind of wondering like what your kind of plan is and what you're going to delve into in the next coming books as well.
Yeah, and but I appreciate the question. And before I answer it, I do want to provide my immense gratefulness for both of you being here. I deeply respect both of your work, and for you to take the time to be with us, it means a lot to me. And I hope that everyone will go out and find Catherine and Ross's work. And I've gushed about Catherine's work before, and I'm just now getting an opportunity to get into Ross's work. And I'm, it just means a great deal to me that y'all are both here. In terms of spiritual or religious things that I'm trying to examine in the book, primarily there's a pervasive thread line through the narrative about talking about religious trauma. Most of the characters in the book or in the series have experienced a form of religious trauma, be it either through faith itself or through the religious institutions by which religious authority is provided. And we deal with that. We deal with that in the first book through the examination of William Daniels, the exorcist, and his spiritual journey that's led to his excommunication and ecclesiastic censure by His Holiness in ex cathedra. And the second book, the one we're talking about today, All the Prospect Around Us, this deals more with a challenge that is pervasive in the American Protestant tradition. Explicitly, one of the main characters, Gabriel, talks about his position through being an American Baptist and the challenges that he had. All of the books they all deal with possession. The first one is specifically about demonic possession in the vein of William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist. The second book is more about how we possess each other in terms of our relationships. And then as we get further into the series, we'll deal with possession either in terms of objects or how trauma possesses us and how we're able to move forward. And I don't want to say that, but how we're able to lean on each other as a community whole, not a religious community, but a faithful community, no matter what the religious background may be. And so there is that sense of healing that takes place through relationships and love. So I hope that answers your question. I'm a long talker. If no one's ever heard me talk before, I'm a long talker. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's really important that there's a series out there that's dealing with this topic because, I mean, 2020 was kind of a mind bender for me. I obviously, due to like quarantine and lockdown, we stopped going to church on Sundays. We were going to an evangelical church here that was non-denominational, but have since not returned. And I don't think I will ever again, to be perfectly honest with you. When you're talking about like trauma at the hands of the church, like nothing was really done to me directly, but indirectly, just watching the church's response and different Christians to things that were going on. Like, I think that was always there, and I always knew it was there, and I always had understood it to be a vein that runs through and tarnishes. But it just really became super evident in 2020. So reading your books, like whenever there's anything like spiritual going on, I tend to feel super triggered. But I also think that you handled those elements and spoke to truths that I think are really important for people to hear, especially in Prospect. So this book is coming out.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. I know that, for those who may not know, I'm a former minister in the Southern Baptist Church, though I no longer consider myself a part of the Southern Baptist life. So just a little bit of housekeeping about me. There is a pervasive sense of nationalism that's the third time I've used the word pervasive. Go ahead. I should say there is a toxic malady that's running through, especially in what is known as the Bible Belt of the United States, in the form of Christian nationalism. That because the church has been so heavily influenced by the religious and political right in the country. And I felt a deep sense because I do have a strong faith that's born out of a furnace of doubt. And so I felt like there has to be an opportunity for us to make statements that, while they're not real, because Blackwell's is not a real place, but for me, I talked about this on the She Wore Black podcast a little bit ago. Just because it's not real doesn't mean that it's not true. It doesn't mean it's not worth taking back elements of faith that have never belonged wholly to any institution, but they belong to the people who reside within those faith systems. And so that's a part of the journey of Prospect. A part of it is dealing with what do we do when the institutions that we hope will protect us turn out to be one of our greatest malefactors. And I believe that Prospect speaks to that. And it's one of the reasons that one of the main characters is a minister and the other one is an atheist. And they are very close with each other. much in the same way that J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis had such a deep relationship. But I will say, and this is important to say, is that this book is not about religious conversion. It is not about suggesting that there is one path or one way to reach whatever spiritual journey you are on, and that whatever truth resides in someone else is a valid truth, so long as it is rooted in those virtuous aspects about humanity and not our selfish ones. So,
yeah, I definitely want to, because you did talk about religious things so much on Agatha's podcast, I do want to focus a lot on the characters and the plot. I was wondering if you would want to read a sample for us.
Yeah, of course.
Talk about James and Gabriel a little bit.
I would love to do that because I love them very much.
Me too. Even just saying their names, I get a little heart thing going.
So for those of you who joined us at the All These Subtle Deceits book launch party, thank you so much for coming to that. But I read the cold open for Prospect at that. So I'd like to read the first 2 pages of the very first chapter of All the Prospect Around Us, which starts with the counseling journal of Gabriel West. So, chapter 1. We were 2 young men burdened with the young, foolish notion that we were going to change the world. Recent graduates with our master's degrees, our hearts and minds were filled with a deep romance for life, a sense of purpose. I was an ordained minister, freshly anointed by a successful defense of my theological theses, and strong in the faith I now consider more a burden than a blessing. We had more books than dollars to our names. My fellow passenger and the very best friend I have ever had was James Goodnight. James was the kind of guy you wanted to impress. Smart, handsome, the kind of man who wore a beard in the way boys dream about before puberty has its say on the matter. A gentleman of savoir-faire, he read books the way people talk about reading books. A man of letters and ravenous for history, James chased after the classics in both written word and in deed, publishing several critical essays on the Alexandrian conquest of Persia. While other people spent their college summers working jobs back in their hometowns and getting drunk with old high school friends, James joined an archaeological society via a non-paid internship that let him travel the footsteps of Alexander's historic march. James always had an interesting story to tell, but never the compunction to be the loudest one to do so. He made the bluest of comedians blanch, put to shame the most charming raconteurs I knew, and though I had heard the thunderous sermons and preached dozens myself, James, with remarkable ease and without a Bible, could conjure to life the scene of the Hebrews chanting at Jericho. In his voice, you could hear the peal of trumpets as the walls of the city came tumbling down. In fact, we first met in a coffee house just off the street of the university, where I watched with absolute astonishment as he provided his perspective on the story of Absalom with such sincerity that it left many of us with tears in our eyes. James, a staunch atheist, had by instinct what every pulpit writer tries to attain with tireless practice: the ability to connect ancient divinity with modern humankind. That singular gift made me take notice of him, but it was our mutual pursuit of knowledge that made us friends. For a time, a woman made us opponents, though never enemies, and the aftermath of her cancer diagnosis made us brothers. I can say there is nothing I would not have done for James. As I said, we had little money. Our liberal arts degrees doomed us to that fate forever, but we didn't care. We had a half tank of gas, a destination that was only a quarter tank away, and someone who was willing to put us up for a few months in Blackwell's. We would find work while toiling away to build a career. The road we were on curved through pine trees older than the nation that preserved them. When we came out of the press of evergreens, the Astolat shot up from the horizon like a crown of dark gray stone jeweled with wedding white snow caps. The sun, peeking out between a pair of equal subordinate summits, shone as the sunrise had been crafted just for this moment, just for us. It was a welcome sight after the previous night where we'd spent over half of our cash to stay at a motel James dubbed the Murder Castle Inn. But the semi-derelict bulk was behind us, and here we were, riding toward real adulthood with the sun on our faces. The wind blowing through the windows ran fingers through our hair with the dewy musk of black earth and pine needles. That moment stays with me because everything seems so clear and bright, alluring. It's funny that I can recall us talking about how incredible the sight was, but I cannot remember a single word of that conversation. Only the feeling remains. I hold it often, remembering it. And that's the first 2 pages of all the prospect around here clapping. Thanks.
I can hear the people in the chat clapping too.
Of course.
I was clapping because I just love hearing an author read their work. Like it just
Yeah.
completely changes it. Like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yes, I hear people actually clapping. Seth, I wanted to let you know that Tracy is here. I saw her in the chat. Also, Marissa says that she is fighting with, or here, I'll just put her comment up here because it's so cute. She's fighting with her Deep Woods data internet to join the online party on release day. Seth, that is a wonderful opening. Like, I immediately felt transported back to when I was reading it and just felt that whole just exuberance of like going on this road trip with your best friend. Like, it's just a total vibe. Like, the friendship in this story is, I think, paramount to everything else.
Yeah. Just to reiterate what Sadie said, as you know, I read these 2 books backwards, didn't I? Because I read this first. So
Right.
if anyone hasn't read either, it makes no difference. You can do that as well. But like you said there, Sadie, it just takes you straight back into the book. And like that was my first introduction to Seth's work. And when you haven't read an author before, you're always wondering, you know, if it's going to work for you, aren't you, in honesty? And I know as soon as I read the opening, I thought, yes, I love this writer straight away. But the contrast in characters between Gabe and James, that's what really is, you know, the crux of the book. Although I did say it, because I've got a review to post when it's on Goodreads. I said, yeah, it is about possession, but it's just as much about obsession, I felt. But the friendship is paramount throughout the book. And the fact that they contrast so, you know, so definitely. I mean, Gabe is the cautious one,
Right.
whereas James rushes in, you know, head first. That's what works. And also their different belief systems as well, and the fact that they're so close. There was one bit that really touched me, the washing of the feet.
Oh, right.
That stuck with me as well. I won't say too much because I don't want to say.
Right. That one is a 2-edged sword, and I also love that scene very much.
Yeah.
It means a great deal to me.
I think as well, touching on kind of what Catherine said about the kind of and Sadie about the relationships between the two, like they kind of dovetail off each other like just beautifully, and like the bit that like brought me to tears was when they were talking about joy and happiness, and just seeing 2 different people, like one man of faith, one atheist, talk about happiness and joy, and but also like it doesn't always have to end in an argument. Like they're both right. And you know, it's that merging of the 2 and them caring for each other and loving, like that kind of love that friends had, that deep kind of love, like kind of seals over those possible cracks that could happen. But also, as Catherine said, like these are my first kind of time reading your work, and like the lyricism you have and kind of the phrases that you pull together are just incredible. And I wish I could write some of them, because I highlighted some of them, and like one that I absolutely loved was where is it? Well, James is the kind of guy you wanted to impress, but then when he talks about reading books, like, or talking about books, like you'd like to read them. And then again, the kind of for a time, a woman made us opponents, though never enemies, and the aftermath of her cancer diagnosis made us brothers. I was just like, oh, this is beautiful. And there was a line, I kind of, oh yeah, the black dress she was wearing was the perfect essay, long enough to cover the subject, short enough to keep it interesting. I'm like, come on.
Right.
Well, yeah, really impressive, and kind of all the kind of biblical iconography that's in there, like the washing of the feet and all that kind of stuff. Just for me, is kind of what I love, and that's kind of like my favorite subgenre. So seeing someone do it so well was brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That's very sweet of you to say.
I do want to touch on really quickly, though, this is definitely a horror novel. I mean, I know we're focusing a lot on, the friendships and the characters and just like the warm, fuzzy feelings that we're getting and the religious horror. But I mean, Dark Heart is horror with heart, and the emphasis is the horror comes first. The heart is there because I feel like horror is the most effective when it is threatening to your feelings. When you're so invested in the lives of these fictional characters that when the horror shows up, you're actually scared that something really bad is going to happen to these people that you've kind of fallen in love with. So I did want to ask you, Seth, can you talk a little bit about why Blackwell's has some problems and what can readers expect as they travel through this 5-book series, horror-wise?
There are two essential themes to everything that I write. One of those things is love. I'm always writing about love. It's different. It's different types. It's different manifestations. And the other one is violence. And I write both of those things very viscerally. I take a lot of how I write violence, or I should say oppression. I take a lot of notes from writers like Cormac McCarthy, especially McCarthy. That when I write about those two things, I want them to be total in their effect. And so whenever I'm writing horror specifically, when things happen to people, they typically happen at a 10. I have very little gray, or I'm not very much a dread writer. I'm more of a terror writer. And so when things happen to characters, it's very bad. And Blackwell's is a sort of gravity well for terrible things. There's a thread line that runs through the whole narrative that will be fully uncovered by the end of the series as to why these things are the way that they are, why Blackwell seems to be such a superconductor for these supernatural and paranormal forces, why there are gateways here, why there are silver windows that we can look through, and when we go through them, we find this horrible place where there is this terrible song that's been sung since the beginning of everything that reaches all the way back past human witnessing. It reaches all the way to the fracturing moment of the universe. And when we gaze at that, when we hear that song, and Blackwell's is the place where that song reverberates to its highest measure. And when we experience that, we find ourselves at the very threshold, the precipice of the things that scare us the most. And that's why, the first book deals with lies. It deals with deceits, how this city is deceitful. It wants you to come here. It wants all of your pain, all of your sorrow. It craves it. Like a beast that is so old, all it knows is hunger, no longer even the hunt. And that's sort of the theme that runs through Blackwell's. Laird said during our last book launch that it feels like a crucible. And it is that. It's a testing ground. Can we persist? Can we choose to love each other high enough to overcome these things that terrify us? I like to use the metaphor like, there is darkness all around us. And if we're going to find each other, there has to be a lantern. There has to be someone willing to hold a lantern to walk into that chasm and call out other people's names, not knowing what is in the dark and what will hear those voices when we call out. And that's what Blackwell's is. It's that darkness where there are so many candles ready to be snuffed out. If that answers your question, I hope it does.
Yeah. And
Sorry.
then some. I'm just kind of sitting here like, whoa.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It's awesome. There was a couple questions I want to get to up here. Okay, this is a two-parter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first part says, Seth, I really enjoyed your interview on the She Wore Black podcast. I did too, and I highly recommend people listen to that. I was curious, since listening last week, how does your faith community respond to you being a horror writer? He also goes on to say, I was surprised when I released a horror novel that people I considered fairly conservative in the church came out of the woodwork about their love of horror.
Mm-hmm.
Great question, Ryan.
Great question, Ryan. Thank you so much for asking it. I will say that in the part of the world that I'm in, when you tell people that you're writing a horror novel, you will typically get one of two different responses. One of those is, oh, that's neat, because they don't want to talk about it anymore. And then the other is, to use Ross's turn of phrase, it dovetails into that aspect of, I love horror. There are two types of people. Some people who love William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist, and then there are people who think that if you participate in experiencing that narrative in any way, you're probably damning yourself to hell. Blah, right. Right. So my faith community, who I consider to be a rich and wonderful blessing in my life, are not terribly interested in horror, not terribly interested in participating in that type of conversation. But that is primarily one of my professional goals, is I want to do for horror what C.S. Lewis did for fantasy. I want people to be able to experience horror as a method of understanding the world around us and the deep magic that exists inside of the mundane world. And I think horror provides an avenue by which we can ask hard questions and look for hard answers. And when we find those answers, they are deeply meaningful. They are impactful. And horror has in its own way, it is a type of sharp tool that can reach places that other genres can't. If that makes sense. I hope that answers your question, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, I think as well, so I'm a believer and I go to church as well. And when my church found out that I write horror, it was kind of, because I don't hold back, and and they were like, you write horror, and I was like, yeah, is there a problem with that? And they were like, oh no, I just wondered like how that works with your faith, and I was just like, have you read the Bible?
Have you taken a look?
Yeah, and they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, the Bible is a horror story, so if you've not paid attention, you should. And I normally chuck out, just go and read Judges 19, and then I'm not just like, I just can't understand it. But then there's some people in my church, when I have spoken about it, like I met a guy came up to me and said, I saw that you write horror books. I was like, yeah. And he said, oh, I've been looking for someone that loves horror as well, but I didn't know if we were allowed to. And I'm like, of course we're allowed to. And he's turned out to be an amazing illustrator who does he showed me like some of these like I would say kind of small kind of Lord of the Rings type stuff that he's drawn, and I'm just like, that is incredible. And he's like, oh, I've just had no one to share it with because I'm just worried what people will say. And I'm like, oh, don't be worried, like, just do your thing. And like you said, like my kind of vision is to bring horror to people that kind of wouldn't read it because it's seen as demonic or whatever. And it's just like, come on.
Right. I don't want to use the word silly because that seems dismissive, but there is for me, a nonsensical amount of suppression for the church, in my experience, the American Baptist Church, an unwillingness to accept the historicity, I should say the thematic elements of the text. And like, I know Sadie wants to focus on the plot and the characters, and I do too. For me, this is important to say. People who are people of faith, of any faith, who are suppressed because of the things that they love and the people that they are and the identities that they have that have been earned throughout the agency of their life. We are all of us brothers and sisters of the same wound, the need to be able to communicate in the ways that are meaningful to us. And horror is as old as any story, and it's as valuable as any other type of story, whether it be romance or fantasy or the thriller, whatever it is. These avenues are important, and they can't be suppressed because we will just continue to show back up. You can only bury it underground, and eventually it'll find its way back up. At least that's been my experience. Did we lose Sadie? No, there she is. Okay, she was frozen for a sec.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my internet is super shitty. Yeah, so to talk to your point, I had this big long debate with somebody in my church setting about horror when I told them what I do for a living. Like this is when I was reviewing it for Scream and other platforms, and I told them that I was reviewing horror and that I have a horror subscription company. I think that a lot of people hide their heads in the sand when it comes to things that are hard to look at. And horror is everywhere on our television and in our headlines, the atrocities that man does to each other. And like you were saying, you know, the Bible is a horror story. There's horrible, horrible things that happen to people in the Bible. So, I mean, it just never really made sense to me how, like, you know, you could read a story that, you know, wasn't as frowned upon to read like 50 Shades of Grey as it was to read something, you know, violent or whatever.
I wonder how many church-going people read 50 Shades of Grey. Come on.
A lot. A fucking lot.
Oh my God. Yeah. So anyway.
I think we're able to write horror because we are empathic people. You know, I just think we just tune into the horrors of real life, where some people just seem to blank it out.
And that seems like, Catherine, that, you know, I know I've only read Mosaic and your short story in Human Monsters, but that's an enormous, and I know I keep using the word thread line. I'll find something else here in a minute. But you've sown that through your own work, especially in Mosaic, which, again, comes out in 2023 through Dark Hart. I can't wait for people to read it. It's very exciting. It's tremendous work. But your character in Mosaic, the entirety, the whole lever of the novel is based upon the empathy that your character both possesses and what your reader can have for her. Because it's so interesting. Your main character is always talking about how they feel about the initial perception of a person that they meet, especially when she meets the workers at the church, and then how those feelings and her empathy change that perception of who those people are. So that's huge in your work.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know. I wonder if it's the 28 years I spent as a teacher as well.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Or is it? It's a bit like the chicken and egg, isn't it? Is that
was I empathetic? Right.
Yeah.
I do want to get a couple of these questions too that happened earlier. Greg wants to know, or he says he can't wait to hear Seth's audiobook versions of the Blackwell series. So we do want to go ahead and say that we do have plans for Seth to read his own work for the audiobook.
Right. So, and an interesting story. So I originally recorded all these subtle deceits, and this gives me an opportunity to talk about Marissa. Marissa Van Uden, who's the editor on all of the Blackwell's books, who has done I don't even want to say tremendous, who's done a superlative job of not only making the books better, but curating a series Bible for each book and the setting that has gone above and beyond any other editor that I've ever worked with. And so I'm deeply grateful for Marissa's hard work. And I'm happy that she now gets to live in the deep woods as a witch, which I know she has always wanted to do. And now she gets to have that opportunity. But I originally recorded all these subtle deceits. And Marissa did such a good job of making the book better that I have to re-record it because of she magnifies the novel so greatly that it would be unfair to her hard work not to re-record it. So I do have plans to do that. when I'm not working on the other or the last two books in the Blackwell series, because I have finished the third one. So,
Okay, so look for that. He also asks, is Blackwell's based on a real city? And then he said he wants to avoid driving through that place at all costs.
Blackwell's is not entirely fictional, and it is not in any way entirely real. I hope that it's not real. If that place exists, stay the fuck away from it. But Blackwell's is an amalgam of many. I've worked on Blackwell's for about 10 years, developing it. And it is, I think I've said it this way before, that it is an accumulation of many disassociated things that just sort of coalesced into this place. That it all came about through a singular plot structure of the Astalot mountain range, which of course is not a real place, because the northwestern section of Colorado just runs straight flat once you get past the Rockies. What I did is I just put another mountain range there because I thought that would be fun.
Tracy also chimed in on the religious thing and said it seems like horror is the forbidden genre because of movies like The Exorcist and the blood and the fear associated with that. But people don't realize there are so many other genres within it. And I would agree too. I was talking briefly about like slashers and movies with serial killers and things. Am I still on?
You are. Yeah. We can hear you.
Okay, my Wi-Fi, I can see the signal going back and forth, and it's like freaking me out.
It looked like you were possessed for a moment, but we're just carrying on.
I am that too. But yeah, so I think a lot of people do associate the horror genre with the movies, which is funny because I don't think there's any other genre apart from like maybe fantasy or something that the movies kind of the genres are so different. The horror movies is such like a visual experience. The horror and the fear and all that comes from like the blood and the guts and the carnage and the jump scares, so it's hard to equate that kind of experience in a theater to what's happening on the page, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Right. I think as well, The Exorcist gets a bit of a bad ride because like the book is absolutely phenomenal. Like it's a detective story which gets pretty much cut out of the book, out of the film, and then you've got like the Father Karras, like his struggles with his own faith and not being there for his mother, and kind of like how a man of faith loses his faith. Like that is deeply ingrained in the book, but like it's kind of almost just little cutaways in the film. And it is a love story. It's kind of like I find it funny how a film kind of but it's always the same, isn't it? Like films always get spoken about, and the book's just like chucked in the back, But yeah, like I think horror is seen as a forbidden genre, but I don't know why, because it's got everything in it. Like you were saying, Sadie, like you've got crime, slashers, all this kind of stuff, and it's kind of what you see on the news when you turn the news on. So what's the difference?
Right. I got into a little bit of a conversation with LP Hernandez, who's the author of Stargazers, from Sadie's My Dark Library. And I would say that's actually I see it as the opposite, Ross, in that every genre, horror pervades it. No matter what genre it is. It's one of the goals of the Blackwell series is that every single one of the books switches up the genres by which we explore the city. And I love blending genres, and I love showing people that horror exists inside of all of them. Even when the narrative tone changes or the themes change, horror is always roiling beneath the surface, like sort of like how a river, even though it's frozen over, you can see the waters turbulent, churning underneath, never resting, right?
I don't think there's any other questions here that we need to get to. But I did want to just kind of like, as a teaser, let people know again that the book comes out on the 13th. So anyone who pre-ordered are going to get those, you know, as soon as that date hits. The book is available at Dark Matter Magazine. You can buy directly from Dark Matter Magazine.
Please do.
I also want to let people know that the horror element, even though we've been talking a lot about like the romance that they can expect in this, all the prospect around us and the friendship, and all the good things that are happening, there's also, I just have to say, like, if you buy this book and read it this month, it's a special treat for you because it does deal with those themes about joy and friendship, and also there's some Christmas-y parts to it. But it's also like pretty frightening. Like, there's a couple scenes in here that I thought were very strikingly visual, especially some things go on in a church. Which I think is really appropriate, since we've been talking about all this. There's the locale that is dangerous, specifically is a church. So I think that that's noteworthy. And there's some really never mind. I don't want to give I don't want to give too much away. I was gonna say something about a friendship, but it's too much of a spoiler. You'll find out.
But as you said, Sadie, it is a horror book, and when the horror hits, it hits hard. And you know, that was the same for all these subtle deceits. Like that book, if you haven't read it, you need to go and get it because the opening chapter is just insane. And kind of just it's the balance of, you've got the love part, which is brilliant, and then but the horror is again like another level, like at the bits in the church and another area. And also I loved the way it was written, like from the different perspectives. We haven't even covered that, but that's really interesting, kind of the narrative structure of it, which again adds another layer to it and to the horror, because you get to witness it from the three different characters' points of view, and what they find horrifying is different from the next, and kind of all of their kind of obsessions and possessions is explored through that as well, which is pretty incredible. Well done.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it very, very much.
Yeah, Seth, did you just have anything you wanted to say to your audience about Blackwell's in general, or this book, or anything? We have a few minutes.
Yeah. I think I would say this. Whoever you are, where you are, there is a place for you in the horror community. Whether you are an old lover of the genre, whether you're just coming to it for the first time, there's a place for you here amongst all of us. And that is entirely what Blackwell's is about. It's about building a place where every person who loves any particular kind of genre can find not a safe place, but a powerful place, a place where your truth matters, a place where you matter. These characters who I care about very deeply are representative of you, the people, and you, the readers. They're certainly not me, though there is much of me in the book. There's probably more of me in this book than there is in any other book that I've written so far. But Blackwell's is a terrible gift that I give to you. And in this way, I hope that you will love the people of this community who are so supportive, as you can see from Sadie and Ross and Catherine. And by supporting Blackwell's, you have both my deep appreciation and my hope that you will reach out and read the books that you will read. Obviously, Sadie's Human Monsters, which she put together with Ashley, that you'll pick up Ross's work, which is tremendous from the small amount I've been able to look at, and Catherine's, which again, I really can't be more effusive about than I already have been. But I hope you'll pick up Blackwell's. I hope you'll give me a chance to both break your heart and put it back together again, because that's always the goal with every book.
Yeah. Awesome. Like Greg also says, how can we best support Seth and his work? I definitely think you can start with the Blackwell's series by picking up All These Subtle Deceits, which is already out. All the Prospect Around Us comes out on the 13th. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram. He has a story in the Human Monsters anthology that came out in October. He also has a Western trilogy that is coming out in 2024 with Cemetery Dance. 2023, excuse me. With Cemetery Dance, ebooks and paperbacks. It is amazing. I had the privilege of reading all 3 books. Fucking you. Excuse me for a second. The Blackwell's saga isn't just contained to this 5-book series coming out through Dark Hart. Spoiler alert, it's fucking coming out in the Westerns too. So,
right.
Oh my goodness. That is like the best Christmas present ever.
Seth has been working his ass off writing novels for the last 10 or 12 years and has just been ruthlessly ignored by the people who have the power to publish it. And he knocked on my door and asked me if I would read this fantasy book that he had. And I was like, I don't read fantasy. And I just kind of was like, what? Like I kind of blew it off. He came back so like you can hear his Southern charm and his demeanor. And he politely asked me if I would read All These Subtle Deceits. And I did. And I had to make this book known to the horror community. I just had to. I worked with Max Booth really closely to get that book published really quickly so we could put it in Nightworms. Then I took it back so I could publish it as a series through Dark Hart. I believe so strongly in his ability, and I honestly think that through this series and through the trilogy, he's going to definitely plant a nice flag in the horror community for himself. So
we live in hope.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, thank you so much, everyone who came and hung out with us in the chat there and had questions for Seth and everything. That was great. Great to see so many familiar faces there. Ross and Catherine, thank you so much for taking time to read and provide feedback for the community. It's just really appreciated. Thank you for celebrating with us today. And yeah, it's really exciting to have 2 books from the Blackwell series into the world by December 13th.
Yeah, thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. Go buy Catherine and Ross's books.
100%. Yeah, I mean, Catherine has stuff coming out all the time, but notably Immortelle that she put out through Off Limits Press is available. Ross has a trilogy of his own that is remarkable, starting with the book Juniper, and then the second book Tome, and then Ross, when does Scorched come out?
I'm just waiting on the kind of edits. As soon as it's back, because it's in my hands now, it will be. I'll just push the go button. So it could be before Christmas or just after. But
that's so exciting.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and if you're watching this, I did compare Tome to Stephen King. It was a Stephen King-like experience for me, that book. So
you're making me blush.
So anyway, yeah, we're done here, but we just want to thank everyone for hanging out with us and celebrating with us today.
Thank you, guys.
You guys sit tight. I'm just going to end this.